The Glastonbury Music Festival is on at the moment. It began today, I believe. Maybe it was yesterday. Someone more informed can tell me. There was some acts on last night, perhaps, and I've got that wrong. I don't want anyone to call me on it. I don't particularly care, I guess, is the end of it. What I really want to talk about is why Glastonbury sucks now in a more cultural way, in a more socioeconomic way, in a way that I think is important and tells us something about society, where we are and where we're going. So this is not a music critique, if that's what you've settled on. I am going to be talking about the Glastonbury Music Festival as a cultural event, and why it represents what has gone wrong, I think, with several things about British culture, but also more widely, probably, Western leftist culture. Right? I don't entirely know what I'm going to say. I've got a few things worked out, but I'm going to riff on this. I'm going to get into the rhythm of this and see where we go. Sort of like a band at Glastonbury in the old days, when they didn't know what they were going to play, but they were going to go out and they were going to jam. There you go. I'm going to do that. So one of the things, I'll touch on 2025 briefly. A lot of people have been talking about Jeremy Corbyn. He came to Glastonbury. He loves Glastonbury. It's the site of his biggest triumph, probably. That bit where they were all singing the Jeremy Corbyn song to White Stripes, and he was the hero of the moment, and everybody thought he was going to be Prime Minister. This was 2018. Was it? Or was it 2017? No, I guess it probably had to be... No, it was 2018, wasn't it? Right, because we had the election late. Or maybe you tell me. It's 2017 or 2018 when Corbyn had his big moment at Glastonbury. But anyway, he's been coming back, sort of trying to recapture that, and he did in 2025. And he made a big speech. At one point, he said, "Let's not build walls. Let's build bridges." The irony of that statement being twofold. The first, just to get it out of the way, is the left don't really like to build bridges anyway. When push comes to shove. I mean, if you tried to get a bridge built somewhere in your town, you'd have a horde of lefties, a horde of green activists telling you that you couldn't do it, possibly for environmental reasons, or possibly because you were going to disrupt the continuity of the neighborhood, or there'd be some bullshit reason. The left doesn't really like to build things. So the idea that the left wants to build bridges in the first place is kind of funny in and of itself. But actually, the central irony being, of course, that Glastonbury has massive, however tall they are, walls built around it to keep people who didn't pay the £400, that's right, £400, there or thereabouts, after all the fees and etc., to get into the festival. So it's this irony of this kind of left-wing politics around, that's supposed to be, right? The whole point of left-wing politics is it's supposed to be about the working people, the disadvantaged people who are poor, and trying to even society out so that poorer people are less poor, right? To some extent, that has been the thrust of left-wing politics forever. So anyway, the fact that it's this festival where you have to pay an absolute packet to get in, there are walls around the grounds to make sure that if you haven't paid the £400, you cannot get in. And we're having Jeremy Corbyn give people speeches about how we shouldn't build walls. I mean, it's kind of all there, isn't it? But I want to delve deeper into this. One of which is I want to go through Glastonbury through the years. And not through the lens of the bands that have played there, but through a truly Marxist lens. You'll be happy to know. As in, through the economic lens. Right? So let's look at ticket prices. So in 1970, to get into the Glastonbury Festival, you had to pay £1. Now you're saying, okay, well, inflation, etc. Fair enough. In today's money, let's round it. Let's just say it's about £15. Okay? You'll agree, quite a cry from 400, right? And again, let's be clear about that. That's inflation adjusted, right? So I'm not pulling any tricks here. That's what we're talking about. Um, for your £1, you would have got the Kinks. You would have got Ian Anderson and some people. It's actually quite a lame lineup, actually, looking at it. It's not very good. But anyway, the point being is it was only 15 quid. And, truck along, why not? And the point of it was in music festivals at that time, in the early 70s, were very much about we want to get young people in. We want to get the young, hip people in, because otherwise what's a festival for? And plus, they were mostly the people who would have been interested, because why would a bunch of older farts want to sit in a field and listen to loud rock music? They say in 2025, obviously, wink, wink. But let's look at it down. So that was the first one. That was the 70s, really near the end of the 60s, so almost borderline 60s. Where do we get to? Let's flash forward. Let's flash forward to 1981. In 1981, it cost £8 to go to Glastonbury. And that is the equivalent of about 30 quid today. Okay, so that's about double, right? Let's say double the amount. And for that, we got, New Order were there. Roy Harper. Hawkwind. In 81, really? Were they still going? Wow, it's amazing looking at the lineups. Glastonbury's not very good, is it? It doesn't have very good bands. It's quite surprising to me. But anyway, nonetheless, let's flash forward another decade to 1992, right? And it's £49, and now that's 100 in today. So now it's actually, by the time we get to the 90s, right, it's properly expensive. And one of the things I think that's really interesting about this is this sort of, it getting more expensive correlates with the loss of rock music being central to the culture, the loss of rock music being a young person's thing. It's getting more and more of an older thing. You've now got like the whole boomer generation who grew up with, rock music, the Beatles, the Stones, etc. And they're still interested in music. So it's becoming less of a youth thing. But at least by 92, it's looking a bit better. You've got Lou Reed, you've got Morrissey, you've got The Fall. That's interesting. You've got, that's most of it. Is it really always that bad? Is it really always not good? I don't know. It's interesting to me. I didn't know that I hadn't really looked at the lineups before I started doing this video. And now I'm looking at it, and one of the points I wanted to make is, hey, in 1970, you could have seen, Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and whatever. That's kind of what I expected. I didn't expect Ian Anderson showing up with his flute, and that's about it. But anyway, it's sort of interesting that Glastonbury's always slightly sucked. The difference between being that it, at least back in the day, it cost you 15 quid, not 400. Anyhow, we... Sorry, this is quite a funny video to make. So, one of the things is, if you look back at the politics of Glastonbury has always been very left-wing. Just going through, I'm looking through some of the lineups, some of the pictures, some of the the posters, the advertising material for the festival down through the years. And, I've got this from 92, and it's got In Aid of Greenpeace and all that sort of stuff. I think the issue, though, really is, I think this is the crux of the whole video that I want to get to. Now, this is the bit where I stop fanning about and what the video is really about. So if you watch this far, now this is where the video gets good, I promise. So here's the thing. If you go back to the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, right, all these left-wing things were countercultural. That was the point. So Glastonbury was trying to represent the counterculture. That was the whole idea. Now, if you look at it, and in 2005, and you've got Corbin there, and you've got a bunch of people waving Palestinian flags, and all that jazz, that basically is mainstream culture now. That's the culture. That's not the counterculture. The problem being is if you want to say, well, what is the counterculture then? A lot of people on the right will say, well, now the right is the counterculture. The sort of anti-woke people, the right in general has become the counterculture. Except I don't really buy that argument, because I just don't think that the right can be the counterculture. I don't think it can be. I don't think it is. I just don't. They don't have it in them. I think part of the problem is the right really struggle with creativity, with art. They have a natural rejection of anything that requires a lot of lateral thinking. I think to be on the right, to some extent, you just naturally are a more literal minded person. I'm not saying that's all the time or that's everyone on the right. I just think that's more widespread on the right than it is on the left. So the left more naturally is creative. It's more naturally about embraces the arts, more naturally embraces new and bold ways of expression. The problem being is that the left doesn't do that anymore. The left have, for a variety of reasons, become completely static in their ability to be creative, mostly because they don't want anything that doesn't cohere to a very strict set of essentially dogmatic viewpoint. You know, there's a dogma around what viewpoints you're allowed to hold and what you're not, in a sort of quasi-religious way. And when that happens, creativity is immediately stifled. You know, creativity dies under authoritarian regimes. That happens every single time. It happened in the communist countries throughout the 20th century. It happened obviously in every authoritarian country. You just see creativity die, because the point being is that when you can have your career ended, or worse, be sent to prison for expressing a non-orthodox viewpoint, or put a new slant on something, or just in any way go against the prevailing cultural orthodoxy, that can have a humongously negative effect on you and your family. People stop doing it. It's really not that surprising, right? Creativity flourishes when you are allowed to express yourself freely, and where the consequences of doing so are very low or non-existent. And we don't live in that society at the moment. We live in a society where there is, you know, quite a lot of risk if you want to be an expressive person or go against it. I mean, the best example, given we're talking about Glastonbury 2025, is imagine a band coming out with an Israeli flag and saying they support Netanyahu or something. I mean, there would be a riot. That wouldn't be allowed. They wouldn't. No, it wouldn't fly. And you know it wouldn't fly. Come on, you know it wouldn't fly. It wouldn't work. Or how about a band calling themselves the Turfs, and having a bunch of songs about gender critical awareness? Now that would probably suck. Actually, I'm not even saying that would be good, but I'm just also saying it wouldn't be allowed. No one would go for it. Whether it was good or it was bad, it would not fly. You know, you have to admit there are just a set of cultural orthodoxies that you have to buy into. And it isn't even like don't hate black people or gay people or something, where you can just go, okay, I mean, fair enough. You know, we've come to a point in society where I feel like 95% of us at least can say that's fair enough, right? You know, let's not have a brutally homophobic group or whatever, or, you know, a bunch of white supremacists. No, now we're talking about like some pretty prescriptive stuff. Right? Like you have to have a very particular set of viewpoints on biological sex, whether it exists or not. You're not allowed to have in any way a nuanced opinion on the Middle East. It is Israel's bad, everybody else is good, including the Iranian theocracy, etc. It's crazy. And here's the thing. It's had a negative... I don't see how anyone can deny that this has had a negative effect on the creativity that's involved. And you can say, well, there's lots of reasons why rock music kind of had its time, and it's kind of dead, and it's kind of gone the way of something like jazz music, right? It's now a museum piece. It's now a reference of itself. It's life as a real creative force that is ever changing and has new things to offer that we've never heard before is gone. That's dead. Much the same way, you know, we had that with jazz. Jazz sort of starts out in the 1920s in New Orleans, goes through loads of different evolutions. You know, you end up with swing bands in the 30s and 40s. That ends up with, after the Second World War ends, you end up with bebop and Charlie Parker. And then bebop goes in all sorts of different directions. And then you end up with like free jazz. And then you end up with jazz fusion, where jazz essentially marries with rock, but really it's funk. And then that's kind of it. That was kind of its last iteration. That was its last it was the last time jazz did something new and exciting that hadn't been done before, right? Since then, you basically have people either trying to continue in the jazz fusion sort of mold, which isn't stylistically not that different from what, Miles Davis or whoever was doing in the 70s. You have trad jazz, where people are going back to older forms of jazz. That's much more common, where people are just trying to basically be bebop groups in much the same way, trying to sound basically like they're in the late 50s. Or even older forms, people trying to do swing or Dixieland or whatever. Basically, the idea being that jazz isn't developing anymore, really. And maybe there's probably some group in San Francisco or wherever who are actually doing really new, bold things with jazz. And actually, if you were tuning into it, you could see it. But the point being is that that's a really, really obscure thing. That's not part of the it's not in the center of the culture at all anymore. And I think that's happened to rock music. I think we're now at a point where rock music really just isn't the center of the culture at all. uh, I think maybe that would have happened with Spotify anyway, this kind of eternal now that we live in, and you can get the whole back catalog of every single group ever made, and it's at the touch of your fingers, and that's probably had an effect. I don't doubt it. But I think also I do think the culture of the left has had a negative effect, because I feel it as a writer all the time, in terms of what you can write or what you can't write, and if you in any way veer away from the cultural norm, then that's it. I mean, you're stuffed. You are shut down. You're either cancelled, or you are widely ridiculed, or everybody says shut up about this stuff, and everybody gets very upset. You kind of have to play the game. And by the way, I'm not even saying that the right doesn't do this. The right does it all the time. I mean, if you want a great example, I'm someone who's fairly centre right in lots of stuff on the economy. I'm fairly small state, low tax. I am very much in a sort of liberal sense. I think people should kind of be able to do what they want without the state interfering, unless it's absolutely necessary. But and I wrote lots of stuff in the Spectator about, it was pro-capitalism. I've worked for center-right think tanks, writing about how I think business is great, about how all that stuff, right? But really, I found myself, when I really wrote about Brexit a lot, about how I didn't like Brexit and how I thought Brexit was a bad idea and a terrible mistake, and I really wrote about Brexit a lot in the negative between 2021 and 2024. Really, that was the peak of it. So about 3 years. Yeah, I was sort of cancelled by the right to a large extent. People just said you've gone crazy. That was a classic one. You've gone crazy. This is a thing you hear a lot of, by the way. If you go against the cultural norm on either the right or the left, you've gone crazy if you have a different a viewpoint. And that sometimes people do go crazy, by the way. I think all that stuff about Bill Gates is using 5G to use the vaccine to blow your brain up or whatever. I mean, all that stuff is kind of crazy, and flat earth, and so there is a point where all this stuff is crazy. But it's amazing now that I think because of the way maybe social media works, if you deviate in any way from the norm, then you're considered nuts, at least by that side, right? So the right for ages were thinking I was nuts because I was talking so much about why I thought Brexit was bad. And they weren't engaging, by the way, in any way with any of my arguments about why Brexit was bad. They just said, well, to not like Brexit is crazy, or makes you left-wing, or some combination of those two things. I would say, having said that, I think the right have fewer topics on which that is the case. I think they cancel people on fewer. That happens less on the right. I think on the left there's a lot less patience for non-orthodoxy. And that's where we end up with Glastonbury, which has become this £400 a ticket thing. So it's only for rich people. So it's a bunch of very rich people and children of rich people who get together in a field in Somerset and essentially celebrate an art form that is dead and has become a museum piece. And given that the music isn't really the interesting thing anymore, and there's no new there's nothing new that's happening in that space with the music. Essentially, it just becomes a space for their very left-wing politics. And again, it's that thing of like, if you don't have those politics, then why would you go? Because in a sense, the politics has become what it's actually about. What it's about is Jeremy Corbyn saying, don't build walls, build bridges. It's about people waving Palestinian flags. That's kind of become the point of it. Because as the music has become less interesting and it's a bunch of mostly older bands just sort of doing their greatest hits from 30 years ago or whatever, and there's certainly no excitement in the music. That's what it's become. It's just become a political thing. And you know what? If you want to do that, it's fine. It's just, I guess what rankles is the hypocrisy of it. It's this idea of left-wing people who supposedly care so much about inequality having this completely indulgent weekend that costs them all a packet and that you can only go to if you have a mass amount of basically, free money floating around, available money, to then go sit and talk about left-wing politics. It's like, well, okay. You're all just basically sitting in a field agreeing with each other. Oh yeah, from the river to the sea, and oh yeah, trans rights are human rights, and everything else. And Jeremy Corbyn will back that up with his, don't build walls, build bridges, but not here, obviously. Obviously, we need walls around Glastonbury because otherwise the hoi polloi would come in and that would be horrible. It's the hypocrisy of the whole thing. And I don't really understand how people who are on the left don't see it. That's my basic take. And I will leave it there. I know this was a bit of an experimental video in places. If you got this far, thank you for listening. I did think I did in the end come around to a point on Glastonbury. I saw the Corbyn speech about the walls and bridges, and I just thought it was ridiculous, and it just pissed me off. And I thought, okay, I'm going to sit down and do a video. And then I got here, and then I hadn't really thought it through. But actually, I'd like to do more videos where I don't really think it through, where I kind of riff. Because I think that's the way to get better at doing this. Because actually sometimes trying to find your point while you're doing it, you can get somewhere more interesting than if you're trying to write it out all beforehand and you're just, I might as well just write an article if I'm going to write an article. I'd rather, if I'm going to do this as a separate form, do it as a separate form. So anyway, thank you for listening. I'm Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad. If you like this video in any way, please watch my other ones, like and subscribe, all that YouTube bullshit. Blah, 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 blah. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you again soon.